I want to talk a little bit about Hurricane Preparedness Week, which was the first week of May. It was May 2nd through May 9th before this class, but I want to go over some of the graphics and elements that were shared by the National Weather Service about Hurricane Preparedness Week. I've also included a link to those below this video, but the video, please watch because I go over a lot of the points they're talking about here, and at the end of this, I'll have some final comments to talk about why the social sciences of all of this is so important and what this is all about. It's about the social sciences of meteorology, right? Because it's all about communications. So with that being said, let's talk more specifically about Hurricane Preparedness Week that was from May 3rd to May 9th, and here's a few details. So Hurricane Preparedness Week, May 3rd through the 9th, is a national event that because hurricanes can literally affect any part of the country. They tend to affect coastal areas more, but also inland areas, as evidenced by the flooding and the significant impacts we've seen from decaying tropical systems all over the interior portions of the United States. So basically, Hurricane Preparedness Week is an important outreach event for the National Weather Service. It happened in early May this year, and they had a special graphic prepared for each day, a special topic for each day of the Preparedness Week. I'll go over just a few of these. The link to these is below, of course. You can see the whole site, but they really broke it down nicely. They talk about initially know your risk of water and wind, and I go to the site here. It has a nice little graphic, talks about how you should know your risk, what threats will be a factor for you, determine if you live in a flood zone, for example, that sort of thing, or in an evacuation zone, such as near the coastal areas. That's the theme for the first day of this preparedness week, and then the second day, prepare before hurricane season. So it just kind of gives you some reminders of how you need to be prepared before hurricanes develop and might impact your area. Develop evacuation plans if you're in those areas that might need to be evacuated in the event of a hurricane. Disaster supplies, that sort of thing. Check your insurance for coverage and such, and create a communication plan for you and your loved ones in case you happen to lose power, lose your cell phone service, that sort of thing, and you need to share important weather information. It goes on here. So the third day, they focus on understanding forecast information. This is a real key one for the topic of this course, which is the social sciences, of course, of weather, where we're talking about the communication of weather information. And this is important because it talks about how to rely on forecasts from the National Hurricane Center and your local weather service office. What does that imply? It implies find your trusted sources of information. Remember, that's the third key takeaway that we talk about in this class for social sciences. So you need to find a trusted source of information. You rely on those forecasts from the National Hurricane Center and the Weather Service offices. Know your alerts and the differences between a watch and a warning. What's that fall into? That category falls into the comprehension, right? Do you comprehend what the forecast is saying, the details of the forecast? And not only that, do you understand how much time is involved? If you see a warning, how much time do you have to react to that warning? For example, a tornado warning, you have to react immediately. Hurricane warning, you have to react, but you may not have the same time constraints as a tornado warning, for example, because you have a little bit more forewarning that you're going to feel impacts. So there's a difference. And then you have to focus on potential impacts, regardless of the storm size or category. We've seen this repeatedly with tropical systems. As they decay and are no longer a hurricane, they produce even worse impacts. Storm surge, localized flooding in the mountains, such as happened in North Carolina and Southwest Virginia with the remnants of that tropical system a couple years ago. It was just devastating, right? And we had this happen repeatedly when we see these decaying tropical systems move inland. We have serious flood conditions because they can produce torrential rainfall. They're carrying so much moisture with them. So there needs to be an awareness that the flash flooding is a significant impact from any of these systems, regardless of the strength of the system. It doesn't take a Category 3 or 4 hurricane to produce devastating impacts. It can just be a tropical storm, for that matter, and still produce awful amounts of flash flooding. And finally, it says, know that deadly hazards occur well outside of the forecast cone. And that points to the fact that you need to not pay attention to just the forecast center track of that storm, but understand the uncertainty. And that's what the forecast cone conveys. It conveys the degree of uncertainty as time goes on, away from the forecast time period. In other words, Here's where the hurricane is now. 5 days from now, here's where it's expected to be. And that forecast cone widens out because there's more uncertainty about the track of that. So there needs to be an understanding of that. Okay. Some other things they talk about is understanding forecast information, get moving when a storm threatens. Talks about evacuation plans, that sort of thing. Nice graphic talking about that. Don't forget your pets and how you're going to protect them. And if you have to travel with them, how you need to prepare for that. Then it talks about stay protected during the storm. Okay, so notice the timeline here. It talks about the forecast and then during the storm. And this is some of the precautions you take. Have your plan in place, your safe place, for example, where you need to be sheltered if you need to be. Keep in mind that impacts can be felt far from the coast. That's something we need to remember. Okay, and then listen to local officials for their advisors on what you should or should not do. And then use caution after the storm. Talks about tips on what to do after the storm. Be aware of power outages, trees down, that sort of thing. All kinds of hazards happen after the storm. All right. And then finally, it talks about take action today. And that means you need to be prepared today. Determine your risk from water and wind. Begin preparing now before a storm. Learn how to understand hurricane forecasts and alerts, and learn what to do before, during, and after the storm. It's interesting. They made a nice timeline here with the graphics. They talked about how to plan ahead, prepare before the hurricane season. That's well in advance, like right now, okay, in May. Understand your forecast information. It's talking about understanding how you get your information, where you get it from, find trusted sources, that sort of thing, and how you comprehend the information. Understand that. And then it talks about get moving when a hurricane threatens. So this is just before the storm impacts your area, maybe a day or even 2 days before you see direct impacts from a tropical system. So get moving when a storm threatens, and then when it's actually happening, here's what you do. Then during and after the storm, what's the caution you need to be aware of after the storm, and then kind of review all of those bullet points. So really cool information there, very important, but goes down again to all the social science of all of this, how it's all about communication. Let's talk a little more about that. So let's review what we just looked at, those 7 days of highlighting each day an important part of the Hurricane Preparedness Week. What's it all boiled down to? It all boils down to is part of the social science of all of this, right? The communication of weather information that you can use to help prepare for a dangerous weather situation that could be potentially affecting the area, and how you would react to that, and how would you get the information. All the key bullet points from the social science stuff we talked about are in those 7 graphics I showed you. Bullet point of how do you receive the information? If there's a hurricane coming in, how do you receive the information if there's a warning, if there's a watch, anything like that, or associated tornado warnings? Do you get it through your phone apps? Do you get it through local TV source? Do you get it on a social media page? Those sort of things. So you need to know where you're getting the source of information. That's the reception. Then there's the comprehension, another key consideration or takeaway. How do you comprehend the forecast? We talked about it in some of those graphics, right? How do you understand? Do you understand the difference between a hurricane watch and a warning? Do you understand what the cone of uncertainty is, where it's, the farther out in time you get, there's that cone that the impact could be anywhere within that broad area. It's not just that one line forecast where it's coming up over a certain area. So you need to understand the uncertainty that's inherently built into the graphics that the Hurricane Center produces and that they use to communicate their forecasts. And oftentimes we forget about that when we look at, hey, it's going to move here, looking at a straight line, for example, and look at an exact time frame. Whereas if you truly are comprehending what they're saying, they're expressing uncertainty too, and you need to look at the broad picture of all of that. So the comprehension is important. Also, do you know the difference between the watches and the warnings and all of that stuff for not only hurricanes, but for tornadoes, because tornadoes often happen with hurricanes. Or flash flooding, very frequently a big issue with hurricanes. What would you do? Is a hurricane warning the same as a tornado warning? No. Hurricane warning gives you a little more time to prepare and act. A tornado warning gives you no time. You got to react right away, okay? So you need to know the time factors here involved to comprehend that, okay? Then there's the matter of trust. Remember, that's our third category, key takeaway. Do you trust your source of information? You need to find a trusted source of information. ideally, the National Weather Service is always a trusted source. They're always there 24/7. Find them, via their website. Follow them on social media. They're on Facebook. They're on X, Twitter, Instagram, I believe. YouTube. They have briefing pages on YouTube. So whatever site you follow, they are probably posting some social media stuff, depending on what the site is. I'm not sure if they're doing anything much on TikTok at this point, but you need to follow whatever your trusted source is. That's the point. Weather Service is always a good one. Your local TV meteorologist, their social media sites, probably a good place to follow. The National Hurricane Center, a great site to follow too, because they give the broader outlooks, the big perspective of tracking the storm days and days in advance. So that gives you a lot of advance notice. And then with the trust, you also have to know that if I trust that information, how do I then respond and react to that information? And that's a big part of Hurricane Preparedness Week. How do you prepare and respond to the information shared with you by the Hurricane Center and by the National Weather Service, by broadcast meteorologists, by the Department of Emergency Managers, by all of these sources of senders of information? How do you respond and react to that? So number one, you need to know how to get the information. You need to know how to comprehend it. You need to trust the source you're going to get the information. And then that's when you can take into account how you would respond and react to that information. All right. But you need to know how you would respond. And what ways should you prepare? And I went through all of that talking about those graphics. So the social science connection with all of this Hurricane Preparedness Week, or it could be severe thunderstorm preparedness week, or winter storm preparedness week. The point of all of this by NOAA and the National Weather Service is to bring social science into the whole scheme of things, and to use the social science as an important and consider it a vital link to the whole science of meteorology, because communications of the forecast is what it's all about, right? So with that, I thought this was a really important thing happening this first part of May, and I want you to just please check out the graphics again. I put the link there for you to check out too. All right, thanks.